Okay, hello and welcome to my virtual senior seminar. Today we're going to be talking about the foster care educational gap, or more so, bridging the foster care educational gap. I just want to talk about really quickly as to why I chose this topic. A couple years ago, I did a speech at Heston College that addressed some foster care issues, and I think that's just kind of where my starting point, made me want to dive into this more. So some of the resources I used back then, I'm using now in this speech. Foster care has always held such a special place in my heart. It's something that's really important to talk about, and especially when it comes to the education aspect of it. So let's dive in. I apologize, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, so let's start. Each year, thousands of kids enter the foster care system in the United States. As they move throughout homes and schools, foster children often end up falling through the cracks of the education system, thus resulting in little to no academic success. Before I go any further, I just want to say I'm sorry if you hear me rustling through papers. It's just my notes. I'm a little nervous right now. I don't know why. Okay, so let's revert back to the presentation and talk about the overview. So this is a qualitative study that will delve into what the foster care educational gap is, the contributing barriers, and what steps can be taken to start breaking through these barriers. So there are 3 questions we are going to address today. I've already said this like 3 times, but 1, what is the foster care educational gap? 2, what barriers do children in the foster care system face when it comes to academic success, and how does that affect their future aspirations? And 3, what steps can be taken to start breaking through these barriers and not to continue to let children or foster children fall between the cracks in the education system. All right, I'm going to throw some statistics out at you. It's a lot, but bear with me. These are super important. Okay, so according to iFoster, which is a nonprofit organization based in California that obviously works with foster care children and the foster system, there are currently over 440,000 children in the foster care system in the United States as of today, and that number is always continuously growing. The National Foster Youth Institute, which is also another nonprofit organization, states that of all foster children in the US, 50% or less will end up graduating from high school. Of that 50%, 3% will then end up graduating from a 4-year college. The high school dropout rate is 3 times higher for foster children in comparison to those children who might live or come from a low-income family. So let's do a little math problem, or what I like to call some real-time numbers. Okay, so let's say that right now, in this moment, there are exactly 440,000. We know that's not the truth. We know that number's growing, but let's just pretend for the moment being. So if only 50% of that 440,000 foster children end up graduating from high school, that's 220,000. If 3% of that 220,000 end up graduating from a 4-year college, that's 6,600 foster children, leaving behind 213,400 foster children. But we cannot forget about the other 220,000 foster children that we kind of split off to the side there in the beginning that will not even end up graduating from high school. So out of the big 440,000 number, only 6,600 will end up graduating from a 4-year institute, thus essentially leaving behind 433,400 foster youth or children. This right here is the gap. This is the gap itself. This right here, all of it. Just remember this, because these numbers are so significant. There's such a huge, that's a huge difference between 440,000 to 6,600. This right here is the gap. Okay, so here's some quick little facts. The American Bar Association and Casey Family Programs, they state that on average, within their first year of being in the system, a foster child will move between 1 to 2 times. That's kind of what statistics have shown. The the American Bar Association and Casey Family Programs also states that on average during their entire time while they're in the foster care system, children end up moving between 2 to 6 times. Yeah, 2 to 6 times. The National Foster Youth Institute reported on their website that sometimes, this is a little more rare than it is common, but sometimes children do end up moving as many as 15 times. A lot of children, unfortunately, no matter the length of their stay in the system, they do end up moving around quite often. So reverting back to the American Bar Association and Casey Family Programs, they also stated that each time a foster child moves, they are more at risk for losing between 4 to 6 months of academic progress. So the National Center Brief, I think I actually spelled that wrong. I think I meant National Brief Center. Anyways, they stated that 42% of foster children, when they move, each time that they move, they do not start school right away because either school records get lost or there's a gap in their attendance. So thus, just as the American Bar Association just proved, this is part of the reason as to why foster children are at risk for losing 4 to 6 months worth of academic progress because they do not start school right away. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce you to the barriers really quick. The barriers are not receiving / having access to proper help while in school, a lack of access to basic necessities, and the debate over who has access to a child's school records, which goes more in depth with a lack of communication between entities. Okay, so let's talk about my literature review. So in this portion, we will discuss the various findings from the academic journals and other sources that I researched from. We will distinguish the contributing barriers that distance foster children from receiving an adequate education, how we can break through this gap, and what schools around the U.S. might already be starting to implement programs or practices to help break through this gap, and then also how a positive classroom environment can help students thrive. Okay, so as I already said, once again, the barriers are lack of preparation in academics, an inadequate support system, and a misplacement of information. So let's start with lack of preparation. In an article written by Thomas Brock, he talks about how foster children, they often feel that they do not have proper preparation for when they want to attend a higher educational institute. He talks about in his article or his journal how foster kids often get stuck in the remedial education trap. So remedial education is essentially an instructional program that focuses on students between 6th through 12th grade, and it focuses in on their deficiencies in reading, writing, and math. As Brock went through his article, his end results showed that remedial education might not be as effective as we think. If you're almost only focusing in on 3 areas where a kid might be struggling and you don't focus in on any other areas or give them any other type of support, it's not going to work very well. So he makes suggestions to rethink the system, take a look at what's not working, why is it not working, what changes can be made, and how can we help these kids. Martin and Jackson, they did a survey in their scholarly journal of 3 former foster care young adults. So the criteria for this is that the participants had to have spent 1 or more years in foster care, which unfortunately those people are not hard to find. And they asked them questions as to how they think the foster care system could help improve educational opportunities and just what their overall thoughts of education while in foster care is. Most of the participants said that they feel that they had inadequate access to basic needs. So I'm talking a pen, a pencil, paper, books, just even a quiet space to study. With lack of access to this, it's hard for them to thrive in the academic setting. And then 1/3 of the participants said that they had a desire for parental or authoritative figures to encourage them in their academic journey. And then he then touched base on foster youth wanting to achieve higher educational opportunities, but without that parental support, they feel that they are not able to because they don't know anything. They feel that they are not able to achieve these dreams because if no one's there to support them or no one's there to guide them, it's hard. And even then, they said even in the earlier years, having that proper support in place is very important. Okay, so this is my favorite slide. It shouldn't be, but it's probably the most important slide. So if you take anything away from this, take this slide away from this portion, okay? So authors Zetlin, Weinberg, and Shea, they also did a study where they conducted 3 focus groups, and these focus groups consisted of foster care caregivers, school liaisons, and agency education advocates. So a foster care agency, someone who advocates for education within that system. When they were interviewing the school liaisons, there were many things that were brought up, but the one thing that kept getting brought up was they felt like there is a lack of communication between schools and a foster child caseworker. This is a really scary fact that I'm about to state, but it's true. Schools may not always know which children are in foster care and which are not. I'm going to repeat that again in case you didn't hear me. Schools may not always know which children are in foster care and which are not. This is scary. Moving on, the schools also feel left in the dark with learning about basic information about foster children. They may, if they get a foster child and they don't know anything about them, it's hard to know how to support this child. In another article by Zetlin, he talked about how when schools get a foster child and they have an IEP, and if it's such short notice and they don't have a new IEP made up, they often have to go off of that old IEP, whether it was effective or not, and they have about a 30-day period to create a new IEP. So this is not a little, but it's a big time gap as to, if that old IEP was not effective, it's not going to continue to be effective, and it just leaves that foster child struggling more and more. So a lack of communication right here is really, really probably one of the biggest barriers that schools, caseworkers, et cetera, often face. Okay, so let's talk about some breakthroughs to closing this educational gap. Referring back to Thomas Brock's article, this might pertain more to higher educational institutes, but he suggests implementing incentive programs that will help students see that their hard work is paying off. It made me think of when we were little and we had those little reading programs where if you read so many books, you could get a little coupon for a personal pan pizza. So even implementing something like that at a young age, or something different at high school age, each school district would kind of have to come up with a system that best works for them. He also suggested enhancing student advising services and support services. And then Konarski, another author, he agreed with this. He said that when the educational institutes increase support services, it results in the children feeling like they belong. And I could see how that is. That makes a lot of sense. If you have someone who truly cares about you, it really does make you feel like you belong. Author Vaca, he also agrees with what Brock and Konarski have said, but he also said that schools need to be a little more understanding of the educational difficulties that foster children face when they are moving around. Just the just the stress that a child goes through, not knowing exactly where they might even be at academically. So he suggests that policies should be implemented at the local, state, and national level that supports effective educational reforms and innovative practices inside the classroom. All right, so let's talk about how a positive classroom environment can really benefit a foster child. Lacauer, McLaughlin, and Dees, that's all one publication. In their article, they said that by creating a positive classroom environment, it can push a foster child to thrive academically, socially, and emotionally, let alone other students as well. It pushes all kids to want to thrive. So they did a study where they surveyed 61 K through 6 teachers, and they have identified these 3 themes that help create a positive classroom environment. The first one was proactive disciplinary techniques, and I really wish I would have collabed with Sarah Balzer a little bit on this because she talked about restorative justice practices. So, those kind of go hand in hand. But anyways, they talked about role play. And I've actually seen some people, myself, do this when disciplining a child. If something's not working, you have to think of a different way. Maybe like it kind of suggests role play through what just happened. Maybe it'll help them see better. If that's not working, think of other ways. You just have to be very proactive and being creative with disciplinary techniques rather than sitting them in the corner and just leaving them to think about their thoughts. They also suggested praise and encouragement. So saying, good job, you're doing great. Just, what our professors do every single day. You guys can do this. It encourages me. It would also encourage a little child. So that is another big thing. And then they also talked about effective homework strategies. So whether that's working one-on-one with a teacher, with another peer, getting a tutor, starting a homework group, this can really make a world of difference. Or even they talked about teaching foster parents how to work effectively with their foster child when it comes to their homework or any other academics. Martin and Jackson, they talked about how foster children and foster youth, they often internalize the stereotype of being low achievers. It's just, I don't know how it's come to be, but sometimes people think of foster youth as, oh, they're never going to go far, So then they start to internalize this like, oh, well, they don't expect much of me, so why should I expect much of myself? This is where the low achiever syndrome, quote unquote, that's just a thing I just made up, but it makes sense, comes from. And sometimes teachers even begin to internalize this too. That frustration of having a kid come in and out of your classroom. It's easy to not want to not think that they'll be very high achieving with moving around so often. But they suggest that by creating a positive classroom environment, this can create a totally different outlook for foster children. And this also kind of this refers back to the incentive program that Brock suggested. Giving a foster child incentives helps them throw away that low achiever thought in their head and can help them succeed academically. All right, so I just threw a lot at you. So let's just talk about a quick summary of my research from the literature review. One, there are multiple bridges and barriers that a foster child faces when they go through the academic system. 2, there are many breakthroughs, including increasing academic support services, implementing what I just call them incentive programs that can help push a foster child to thrive. And then we also talked about creating a positive classroom environment and how that has multiple benefits for a foster child. So here are some more questions to ponder. How do educational opportunities differ between children in the foster care system versus those who are not in the foster care system? And then number two, how can we break through any barriers that might be in the way of them achieving a degree in higher educational institutions? All right, methodology. So how did I do my research? I chose a qualitative study because I felt it would give me more in-depth views and perspectives as to what the roadblocks and barriers really are with this situation. My population sample or samples were teachers, school administrators, school social workers in the foster care system and or caseworkers, and potentially foster families. To sorry. To collect this data, I created questions to conduct interviews with this population sample. So I had general questions that any of them could have answered, and then I kind of broke it down to whether they were from the education aspect, more of the foster care aspect, or if they were a caretaker. I only completed one interview, which I'll talk about. And then that interview was transcribed, and there were 5 themes identified, which are, sorry, I lost my thought. Better communication within the system, success within a classroom setting, transition support for foster children, individualized learning plans, and more support for addressing the issue of inadequate access to basic needs and bettering the mental health of foster children. All right, so even though I only had one interview, there was a lot of rich data that was collected. It was a very great interview. And the questions that I asked obviously pertain to the participants' area of expertise. She was in the area of education and specializes in special education. I just now realized I forgot to touch base on that earlier in my presentation, but it's in my paper. I'm going to post my paper too if you want to read it, so it's in there. Well, let me go back. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the eligibility for special education services. Okay, so in speaking with this interviewee slash participant, we talked about ways in which they figure out if a child needs special education services or not. And each child, whether they're foster care or not, goes through a series of tests to see if they qualify per se for receiving these services. I put that there are 13 eligibilities, but I accidentally left off a few. But there are 13 eligibilities that the Kansas State Department of Education requires that they must meet. They must meet at least one criteria in order to qualify for special ed services. So some of these eligibilities are autism, developmental delay, which is 9 and under, emotional disturbance, gifted, intellectual disability, learning disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment. I accidentally left off sensory impairment, speech of language impairment, and then a traumatic brain injury. So these tests that they go through are merely just a starting point for knowing how to help the child. Okay, so we're going to talk about IEPs and their categorical program. So an IEP is an individualized educational plan. So every child that goes through special ed in this school district that this lady is in, she said that every child has a IEP, and they also have a categorical program in which they combine the two often. So essentially it's about addressing what needs does the child have, and creating long-term and short-term goals. Then they also talked about how this school district also works with a local nonprofit organization where they house foster children, or more so, it's a housing unit for girls. So this is where they get a lot of their foster kids, although they do have foster kids that come from outside of the area too. So when working with this local nonprofit, and they request that they have a 24-hour notice before they get one of the foster children. They ask this because it gives them a little bit of time to create an IEP for the person. Normally, they know a little bit of information about the foster child before they come into whatever school, whatever grade level they're going into, but in case they don't, they need time to just prepare. My interviewee really stressed that, is they like time to prepare. They don't like to be blindsided by things, but we know that doesn't always happen. So an IEP team, when they get a new foster kid, sometimes they have to just throw together an IEP team really, really quickly. And so she called it more of an informal team, which just consists of like a general education teacher, a school administrator, and then maybe the school psychologist or social worker. But a more formalized team consists of at least a general education rep, a school administrator, a special ed teacher, school social worker, and whoever has the rights to that child. They prefer it if a caseworker could be involved, but that does not always happen. And the Kansas State Department of Education requires that at minimum there must be at least 4 people on an IEP team. So even if they have an informal team formed in the beginning, they need at some point to form a formal team and be more consistent with that. So let's talk about a positive classroom environment, because this is something that kind of related back to what my literature review, or some of my findings in my literature review. So some systems that they have found that worked. One is the buddy system. So this is not just for foster children. This is for new kids of all ages. They try to pair up these kids with someone in their class that they feel that they would get along with, someone who they feel could show them around, sit at lunch with, introduce them to their group of friends. They found that to be really effective. Or sometimes they'll just introduce a new kid to a whole new table of kids at lunch and ask those kids to kind of look out for that child. So yeah, they found that the buddy system has been really effective. They also do a check-in, check-out system. This is not for every foster kid or every new student, but if they feel that the kid needs more emotional support or anything like that, they'll do this on the daily. So pretty self-explanatory. They'll check in with the kid at the beginning of the day, and then they'll check out with them at the end, see how things went, what things need to be addressed, how they can help them. We also talked about teachers within the school system make it a point to work really, really closely with foster children. So she gave the example of, say, well, today's Thursday, perfect. Today's Thursday. Say there's an art show on Monday and you have a new foster kid that just came in. That teacher is going to do everything in their power to make sure that that foster child has at least one thing to show at the art show. So it's a lot of one-on-one work and making sure that foster kid feels like they belong. It really makes a world of difference. All right, so here are some roadblocks and barriers, and these are pretty similar to what I addressed in my literature review. Even though, like I said, they request that 24-hour notice from the local nonprofit that they work with, that they get a lot of their foster kids or foster girls from. A 24-hour notice does not always happen. So thus this in turn, that leaves them scrambling for information and scrambling with knowing what to do or how to help this kid, which also falls under a lack of communication. As I addressed that earlier, I said that's really important because it is. Um, Sometimes it doesn't happen often, this person stated, or my interviewee stated, but um, like I said, they may get a kid and they don't know anything about this kid. And they're like, what the heck? What am I supposed to do? So the school district, all the schools within the school districts that she works with, because she works with multiple actually, they've kind of figured out a system that goes around that doesn't okay, let me start over. They have created a system um, that they can figure out a way to get information without really breaking any confidentiality rules. So it's just basically asking information as to, oh, how proficient is this kid in math, reading, writing? Do we need to provide them external support or other internal support? Just things like that. Because if they don't get that school record, they're not going to know anything, but they've managed to figure out a system around this. And then we also talked about just basic needs not being met. Um, they talked about how when they also collab with another entity within that local nonprofit that gives them the foster, or where they receive a lot of their foster students from, how they work with this entity to say, hey, we need a trapper or we need a binder. Can you donate some of this stuff? That it's hard for them to sometimes get some of that stuff for the kids, but they're trying to figure out ways around it. They also talked to, oh wait, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So yes, addressing the basic needs is one thing. I'm getting too excited. Okay, so suggestions for breakthroughs through this barrier. She suggested that this is pretty basic knowledge, and a lot of people will agree, but just a decrease in caseload work for caseworkers and social workers. By doing this, it could help give those caseworkers and social workers more one-on-one attention with their foster children that they are working with. She also suggested a transition support team, which is something I didn't really think about, but it makes a lot of sense. Just being there for the kids. I want to quote something that she said. Oh, I'm jumping ahead again. Okay. She then suggested that the Kansas legislators start focusing in on mental health more for foster kids. And now this is where I want to quote something that she said that I thought that was really good. She posed the question of, how can we expect kids to do well in school if their mental health needs are not being met? How can we expect foster kids to succeed if their mental health needs are not being met as they are constantly transitioning? So addressing the issue of mental health and a transition support team go hand in hand. We have to figure out some way to help support them because it's a lot for a foster child to move once or twice, let alone, like I said, some of them move more than that. And then we also talked about how within the last 5 years, 5 to 6 years, the Kansas State Department of Education has recently made an amendment to the minimum number of credits for someone to graduate from high school. So currently for high school graduates now, I believe it is 24 credit hours that they need. For foster kids, it is now 21 credit hours. And this goes hand in hand with the fact that sometimes the reason that a foster kid might not graduate is because they might have lost a couple credits somewhere along the way, and it's just too much work or too much. They may not want to have to retake that class again. So even with the loss of 1 or 2 credits along the way, they still might be able to graduate by lowering that number. We're almost done. We're getting there. All right. So this qualitative study has showed tremendous ways in which schools locally, statewide, and nationwide can start addressing the issue of the foster care educational gap. All right, so policy and advocacy. Like I just said, the state of Kansas has already made a policy change with changing the minimum number of requirements that a foster child needs to graduate. This poses as a model for other states to do the same. yeah, for other states to look at what Kansas is doing and seeing if it's being effective or not, and how they can also make those policy changes in their state too for those foster kids. Um, I read an article written by Michelle Trayman, and she wrote about how in the state of California, they have started implementing ways as to which they are helping break this gap too. So California is also addressing this issue, which is really great. And they are doing this by tracking the educational progress. Oh my goodness, I spelled that wrong. That's supposed to say progress of a foster child. So that might mean encouraging their teachers to give a little more effort into learning as to where a foster child might be at, or providing more assistance in school systems. Um, there can definitely be further research. um, there can there's more room for opportunity for conversations to be carried out at the local, state, and national level. Um, Oh, I forgot to touch base on this too, but FERPA, they actually made a change, I think it was in 2013, that a caseworker or foster care agency can be qualified as a parent or guardian for a foster kid. But even with that change, there are still roadblocks as to information being passed along from caseworker to schools or other entities. So more research can be done into that as to how we can be more flexible with this, and how we can break that huge communication barrier. And also, of course, conversations with other intended participants would definitely be great for further research. It's different interviewing someone who's in special education versus a school social worker or a foster parent. They each have different perspectives and viewpoints, and different um, experiences with this educational gap. So, how can social workers help, or how can we implement this? Um, First thing, ensuring a child's basic needs are met. So this is where I'm going to pull in a little bit part of my speech from Hesston College. I talked about how when foster kids move around, they often have trash bags to carry their stuff in. And I also found an article from a news station, NBC for Washington. They talked about this too, but if a foster kid is carrying their clothes and stuff around in a trash bag, I mean, that's all that they have. That's all that they have. I mean, they might not have a pencil in that bag. I mean, just let alone carrying your stuff in a trash bag is just, I don't know. That's just not okay. Um, so ensuring that you have to start somewhere, and that might be the place to start. Ensuring that their basic needs are met. And a nonprofit organization called Together We Rise actually has started addressing this issue quite a while ago. So they create little duffel bags for foster children, and they put some basic necessities in there, like if they need a t-shirt or some shoes, a little teddy bear as a gift from them. So yeah, just addressing these basic needs. And this also gives opportunity for school system, foster placement agencies, and other nonprofits to collaborate with this aspect, but also just in general. Like I said, conversation needs to be had about this topic because it's so important. Um, Lastly, something that is very important to remember is that social workers often have a voice, or often have the voice that a foster child does not have. Once again, we have to speak up for these kids. It's my little, I don't even know, my little quote that I live by, be a voice for the voiceless. We have to speak up for people who do not have fair opportunities. So breaking the communication barriers. Limitations due to COVID-19, all interviews were not able to be completed. This resulted in a loss of data collection for my study. So, in conclusion, I've thrown a lot at you, but this is a lot of important information. The purpose of this research, like I said, was to identify what that educational gap is, or the foster care educational gap is, the barriers, and how we can start breaking through those, and the conversations that need to be had. I want to read this quote. This is from the last couple lines of my paper, and I think it has power to it. Every step, every action that is taken from the moment a foster child is placed into the foster care system affects them in the long run. Every foster child deserves the chance to have someone believe in them and help them achieve their dreams. All right. So you made it through my presentation. I was sitting on my bed yesterday, finishing up this PowerPoint, and I was thinking, wow, I really did this. I really wrote a research paper. Even though to me, I don't have all the information that I need, I hope to continue to research more into it in grad school, and maybe one day I'll get my PhD and this will be my dissertation, who knows. I just want to make two acknowledgements in specific. First would be Wendy Schrog. She's an adjunct professor here at Bethel. She teaches healthcare ethics. I've known Wendy for forever, since I was really little, good family friend. She was the one who really encouraged me to go for this last spring. When I told her about it, she helped connect me to a couple of resources. She got really excited, and I was like, I should do it. I should do it, because she's really excited. And yeah, so she got me really excited about it. So thank you, Wendy. I'm very, very glad that you got me pumped up about this. And there's so much further research that needs to be done. And then lastly, to my dear advisor, Ada Schmidt-Thiessen, thank you so much for all your encouragement to me throughout this whole process. I considered changing my seminar at one point, but I'm glad I didn't, because like I said, I feel like I can really grow on this in the future. I was also really anxious at the beginning of all of this, with not knowing if I was going to get all of this done, with not having all my interviews, all of that. I had a lot of breakdowns, but Ada really encouraged me and told me so many times it's going to be okay, and we're going to get through this, and you're going to succeed. And here I am, almost graduated, finished with my senior seminar. So thank you so much, Ada, for all of that. If you guys have any questions, I mean, obviously just let me know. Email me, text me, post them in the discussion forum, whatever. So thank you for listening to my presentation. Remember to stay safe, stay healthy, social distance, and wash your hands.